It has been one wonderfully busy March this year. Hey there, it's Mitzi. Welcome to my channel. Today I wanted to just wrap up all the books that I read, all the challenges and readathons for the month of March. And so I read a few more books at the end of March. Last week I finished up 3 books that I'd been working on. So I finished those up, and I just kind of wanted to talk about all the books that I have been reading during the month of March. I won't go into much detail with those. You can go back and look at some of my weekly updates for that. But I will talk about some of my favorites and things that stood out for the month of March. So during the month of March, I participated in the March Mystery Madness readathon, as well as the Middle Grade March readathon. And they were fantastic. I read lots of great books. I tried to read both middle grade and mysteries throughout the entire month. And so I tried to make at least, because I was reading mostly middle grade since they're easier for me to get through, and I have a lot of those on my shelf unread already. And I also am trying to read the Newberry, so I wanted to squeeze some of those in. So I really made sure that I read a lot of middle grade for Middle Grade March, but then I also made sure that I squeezed in at least one mystery a month. So I know that I read even more than that, several mysteries, so we'll talk about that in a minute. But for this past week, the last week in March, I did finish a couple of things. The first one that I finished was The End, which was The End, the last book in a series of unfortunate events. This is book number 13. I really enjoyed this whole series, so I'm not going to talk too much about it here because I am going to post an entire video on my review of this series. But I did enjoy it, I'll tell you that much. And I can't say too much about this particular book because, again, it is the end of that series. But it's a series of unfortunate events by Lemony Snicket. So I finished that up last week. And then I read a new book that came out, I think, in 2022. It's called The Ogres and The Orphans by Kelly Marnhill. And at the bottom it says she's the one that wrote The Girl Who Drank the Moon. So if you're familiar with that Newberry book, she also wrote that. But this came out in 2022, and I really enjoyed this little book. I checked it out for my library, and it was a story within a story, which is how I like for these kind of books to go, with that fairy tale element, with like a legend leading up to the story. It's that kind of book, and I really enjoy reading those. I think I've mentioned that a couple of times on here because I just like the idea of, as you start the story, you know, long ago there was this thing, and then, you know, the story goes from there. And that's how this one starts. There's this whole background of what's happened in the past and how we've gotten to the point in this story. And so when the story starts, actually takes off, we're in this village, this town, where the library has been burned and things have changed for the worst in this little town that once was a town full of, you know, just kindness, and everyone loved the library. The library is like central in this book, and everybody got along, and, you know, everybody was friendly. But then a new mayor comes to town. There's this tragedy with, you know, the library burning, some other things happening. People start not being able to provide for their families, and it goes from there. I loved the one thing that was really interesting about this book was there was this orphan house, and it centers around the characters in the orphan house. There is an elderly couple who are taking care of the orphans in this village, this town. And I loved the family dynamic of the orphan house. So we have the elderly couple who just love these kids. Everything's about the kids, providing for these children. And then the orphans themselves are loving and caring for one another as well as for the elderly couple. So it's just a wonderful example of a family dynamic. And I loved that everyone pitched in, everyone helped each other out. And they just loved and cared about each other, as well as they love learning. So of course I loved that too. They had their own library in the house where they read a lot. and they look to the books, you know, for learning how to solve some of these problems, that kind of thing. So I really enjoyed that about the story. And then I also loved the Ogress, which is a big part of the story. She lives on the outskirts of town, and she's just a delight. She takes care of nature. She loves nature, so she takes care of the animals, and she has a garden, and she has these crows that she's fed and taken care of, so they all live right around her as well. So she has this great relationship with this the murder of crows. And of course, people think, you know, bad things about her because of the crows. Of course, they have this negative idea about the Ogress and the crows, but they have a negative idea about a lot of things because of this certain leader in this town. So what happens is you've probably guessed it, that the orphans, because it is a middle grade, the orphans kind of have to save the day, and they have to solve the problems in this story. There is a dragon. There's a lot of, it is a fantasy. I guess you've figured that out by now. But there's an ogress, there's a dragon. The kids, the children in this orphanage can speak to the crows. They understand each other. So there was just a lot of interesting things happening in this story. I loved it. I thought it was a great read. It was a real page turner, and I highly recommend The Ogress and the Orphans. That was a fun read. Again, I think it was published in 2022. And then I finished up March with Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm by Kate Douglas Wiggin. This is one that I have wanted to read for a very long time, and I'd found this beautiful copy of the book, I don't know, I think at a library sale. I can't remember where I found, maybe a thrift store or something. But I had placed it on my book cart to get to soon, and so once Middle Grade March came, I thought, well, I'm going to try to get to that one. This, of course, is a classic. It's been around for a very long time. I think this was written like in the early 1900s. I'm not sure, but I think it was pretty early in the early 1900s. This, though, reminded me a lot of Anne of Green Gables. Even the beginning, the very first scene in this story reminds me of near the beginning of Anne of Green Gables, because there's a famous scene in Anne of Green Gables where she is picked up by Matthew and they go to Green Gables. Well, there's that same sort of scene in this story where she gets to know this elderly man from Sunnybrook Farm, from the area, and she gets to know him before she meets anyone else, and they bond immediately. So there's that feel. Now, she doesn't live with them, but there's that feeling from the beginning. So it reminded me a lot already of Anne of Green Gables. She is also a character like Anne with, you know, she's kind of misunderstood, but she has good intentions, and she gets in some trouble accidentally. I mean, not intentionally, does some things that, you know, people don't agree with, that kind of thing. So it reminded me a lot of Anne of Green Gables with that. If anybody's read this, let me know if you've read both Anne of Green Gables and Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm, and see if you've noticed those similarities too. Let me know in the comments if you've read them and you noticed that or not. Or maybe that's just me. But she moves to live with her aunts. She lives with her mother. In the beginning of the story, she lives with her mother. There's a lot of kids, and they're struggling. And so the aunts decide to take in Rebecca and allow her to, they're going to provide for her, and they're going to allow for her to go to school there. So the two aunts take in Rebecca, and it's about her learning to get along with everyone in this area, and especially the main aunt in the story, who is a little rough around the edges and a little more hard on Rebecca. So there's two aunts. One's a little more patient with Rebecca, and one's a little bit harder on her. And so it's about their relationship, and of course Rebecca and how she gets along with everyone in the town. I really enjoyed this. It's not as great as Anne of Green Gables for me personally, but I think that from that first scene, I was already just kind of in the back of my mind comparing it to Anne, so I think that's why I didn't enjoy it quite as much as I think if I had not read Anne. I think really I would have enjoyed it more, but I was constantly comparing it to Anne, and you just can't beat Anne Shirley. So anyway, I did enjoy it though, and I thought it was a fun read, and I highly recommend Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm. So those were the books that I read this last week of March. And so I was thinking about, okay, I participated in Middle Grade March and March Mystery Madness, and I looked back at my reading journal to think about what were the ones that stood out for me, which books were my favorite for the month of March. And I'll say for Middle Grade March, I read a lot of great ones. I mean, really some good ones. I remember Chitty Chitty Bang Bang was one that I loved. It was just a delight to read. I really enjoyed it. But as I was trying to think of my favorite read, the one that really stood out, I think my favorite read for Middle Grade March was A Rover Story by Jasmine Warga. This is fairly new. I think it may be 2022. I think it just came out recently. I don't think it's that old. This was wonderful. I just loved the idea of, you know, the story being from the rover's point of view. I just loved that about it. I loved how they personified this rover and how he had this special mission. I don't know what it was about this that made it so interesting for me. I do like space mission kind of things. I mean, just in general, I like if there's a documentary about, you know, landing on the moon or one of the missions or something, I watch those because I really am, I don't know, interested in that. Now, I do not want to get in a rocket and fly to the moon, but I like the idea of other people doing that. So I am interested in that. But I don't think that was really why I loved this so much. I think it was just because it was so different. I've never read anything like this. I thought it was just such a different perspective, a clever idea to write a middle grade book from the point of view of the rover going on this space mission. So for me, I just thought that was super interesting. And the story itself was interesting too. So I highly recommend A Rover's Story. I've already talked about this one. But when I look back over the books that I read for Middle Grade March, this probably was my favorite. So I do recommend that one. For the mystery, for March Mystery Madness, I read lots of great ones for that too. I read 2 Agatha Christie's, I think, for March Mystery Madness. I loved them, but my favorite, hands down, for March Mystery Madness was The Unexpected Mrs. Polifax by Dorothy Gilman. This was such a surprise. It was not very long, but it was, again, stood out because it was something I had never read before. This is a cozy spy mystery, if that's what you want to call it. Someone in the comments actually said that that was kind of a subgenre that they had discovered they enjoyed, was this cozy spy mystery type subgenre. I didn't know that that was a thing, but now I am super interested because this was fantastic. I loved Mrs. Polifax. I loved her character, and I loved the adventure she went on as a spy in this story. So I do plan on reading more. This was my favorite for March Mystery Madness because now I have all these other books in this series to read. So I'm really excited to continue through reading about Miss Polifax. I'm sure I'm going to read about a lot of great adventures with her. But if you do know of other cozy spy type books, let me know, because until someone commented about that, I didn't know that existed. So if you know of any more similar to Mrs. Polifax that you've read this, let me know in the comments, because I do want to read more like this one. This was just a favorite read, and it was a wonderful surprise in March. But then finally, when I look over all the books that I read for the month of March, I will say that my favorite read has to be James Herriot's All Things Bright and Beautiful. Now, I have to thank you for this, because when I asked you to vote for Sarah over at A Bookish Knitter, she was having a readathon, and she had given us the prompt of green on the cover, and so I gave you several to choose from, and this won by a pretty good amount. This was the book to read. So I read All Things Bright and Beautiful for that weekend. It took me several days. It was more than just that weekend, because I remember that weekend was pretty busy, but I read this over several days. And it is just such a great series. This is the second one. I already have the third one on my shelf, so I plan on reading it soon. Someone had commented that they were reading these just gradually they would read like a chapter a day or something. And I think that's what I'm going to do for the next one, because it's just wonderful to be in this town, in this village, experiencing these characters. And you don't want to leave. And so I think what I'm going to do for the next one, I didn't rush this one, but I did try to hurry and finish it because I was trying to read it for that weekend. So I did read it, you know, faster than just one chapter a day. But I think what I'm going to do is grab the next one and put it on my nightstand, and then do that. Just read a chapter a day, just so that I can stay, you know, immersed in this wonderful village with these wonderful characters for a little bit longer, and just, you know, enjoy the moment with James Herriot and the way that he tells his story, because he is just a wonderful storyteller. I know that this is a memoir. I've heard people say, well, it's an exaggerated memoir. I don't care. I don't care if it's exaggerated or not. I just think it's delightful, and I enjoy reading about James as the vet in this area. So I enjoyed that one. That was my favorite read for the month of March. I looked back at my journal. I didn't count how many I read, but I know I read a whole bunch of books in March. It was super busy for me. I had a lot going on during the month of March, so I'm really surprised at how much reading I did get read. A lot of people ask me, how do you read so many books? So maybe I should post a video about that. If you want that, if you're interested in that, let me know in the comments. But it was a great month of reading. I'm so thankful that we have hosts for Middle Grade March as well as March Mystery Madness, because that encourages me to set aside books during this time of year to read for those readathons. So let me know in the comments, what have you been reading? Have you read any of these? And what was your favorite read for the month of March? Let me know that too. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.